Hello and welcome to Native Yoga Toddcast, and today my special guest, Dr. Michael Shea, for a return visit. Michael, you're one of our most loved podcast guests because people love you. They do. They listen. And so I'm so happy to have you here. And I was just going through all of the different interviews that I've had an opportunity to have with you, starting from the very beginning. We just celebrated our 4-year anniversary with the podcast. And I feel like you've been integral in helping me to grow it, actually, because you bring quality to the table. You study and you pay attention, and you're an incredible teacher. And I really honor this opportunity to have you here. We've had episode 6, interview with Dr. Michael Shea. Episode 33, we navigated through the age of uncertainty. We had episode 44, yoga and Zen meditation. That was our most popular one. Episode 50, the 5-element cosmology and Buddhist meditation. Episode 98, embodiment of the senses through yoga and meditation. The last one, episode 39, the visionary heart. That was great. Today, Polyvagal Theory in yoga and meditation.
Great.
Yeah. Do you think you can talk about polyvagal theory comfortably? I didn't prep you with any questions, so I'm throwing you the wolves here. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I'm aiming to try to keep this as simple as possible because it's a fairly complex subject. I'm hoping that you, the listener, will feel very comfortable, like you can understand. So we're going to take it really slow and steady. And first of all, thank you so much for being here.
Well, Todd, thank you. And it's always a joy being here. Number one, because I get to walk over here from across the street where I live.
Yes.
And it's just delightful. And also to say how much I appreciate not only this studio and you and your wife, because you are my teachers, because I was certified here in the yoga practice. So I really appreciate that possibility of knowing who you are and that we form this community together. But I also really appreciate when I look at the other podcasts you do, sometimes I go, oh, that person's better than me, or that person's smarter than me. And it's not so much that, it's just when I see what you put out, and we're just talking about the podcast now, there is a depth and a richness that can support people's lives. And I think that's really what I like doing and being here for, and I know you do too. So
yeah, thank you, Michael.
So thank you for this opportunity to enrich and support people's lives, and especially their bodies.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. That's a huge compliment. I really appreciate it. You reached out to me and said, hey, Todd, what I'm noticing trending is polyvagal theory in yoga. And you recommended that I read a book, which I got the majority through prior to today, called Applied Polyvagal Theory in Yoga by Ariel Schwartz, which I absolutely love. Thank you, Mrs. Schwartz, or Ariel Schwartz. It's amazing. So I guess my first question for you is, can you just give us a little bit of understanding of why should I know about my vagus nerve? Maybe I'm somebody who has no anatomical understanding of a muscle name, a nerve name, any sort of anatomy study. Why, as say a beginning student, whether it be in yoga or meditation, could I benefit from having a little bit of understanding of polyvagal theory?
Wow. Well, good question. And you really want me to keep it simple.
No, I mean, I want to pull the depth out of you, but at the same time, if you had to make your elevator pitch to me, I jumped in the elevator with you. I got 3 floors going up, and you asked me, hey, have you ever heard of the polyvagal theory? I say no. And you only have a little bit of time to just very briefly explain it, and then we'll dig in deeper from there.
Well, thank you. So polyvagal theory, so vagus nerve, that's, based on the vagus nerve. And vagus nerve, again, so we're talking about the brain, but we're also talking about the body. And, if you go on Google and you put in vagus nerve, you're going to get overwhelmed with a volume of information and research data from the last 20 years or so that's just incredible. So what is all this pointing to, and why is one nerve, within the brain and the body so important? Well, it's an information highway. The vagus nerve is an enormous information highway because it plugs in to every single organ system in the body, literally plugs in, synapses with, whatever you want to call it, and it plugs into every single organ system, every single physiological data point and metabolic data point has to feed through the vagus nerve, goes up to the brain, and then the brain's got to figure out the information that it's getting from the vagus nerve about, the state of my gut, but a lot of the research is about what's going on with the state of my heart. So the vagus nerve is a way in which information is supplied to the brain, but it's also not just about information, it's about sensation. What I can feel about my body. I can actually bring vagal sensory impressions that the body is giving the brain, but I can make them conscious and I can feel that.
Yeah.
Now, that is super important because, like in Ariel's book here, once you have conscious perception of information and sensation in your body, you got choices.
Yeah.
You got choices you can make about behaviors, direction, and so forth. So with this information and this information highway that's going up to the brain, the other main thing that you need to know about it is that the vagus nerve, the primary association is with safety. So this book is a lot about, how do you feel safe in the yoga studio? How do you feel safe in psychotherapy? How do you feel safe on the street? How do you feel safe at home? All of that domain, some of which is unconscious and some of which can be very conscious, like your heartbeat is telling you whether you're safe or not, or whether you're in love or not. But all of that is vital to the way in which we function in life every single day. We need to know we're feeling safe, and we need to have this information, and the pathway has to be clear.
Yes.
So we have to, if we can go and practice yoga, this will help, if we want to say purify, but it'll clarify the vagal pathways so that the information is transmitted better, number one, and that we have a greater sense of safety and we know how to navigate our world better. And we can do this through yoga. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. Yeah, that's one thing that I definitely have picked up from this reading is that yoga actually works. And there's scientific proof. There's actual proof. This can be proven that yoga and meditation does work. And what I'm finding fascinating is that by doing a little bit of study and reading about the vagus nerve and how it does function, it's helping me to move my attention from what I initially thought I was practicing yoga and how I was interacting with my yoga and meditation practice, and helping me to kind of refocus it in a way that I can really appreciate that I have the ability to sense. And like you said, there's a choice, and that's what's absolutely amazing, right? Versus like, oh gosh, I feel my heart racing, and I just keep noticing my heart's racing, but then to actually make the connection that, okay, well, I have the ability to breathe a little differently and move from my fight or flight mode down into my rest and repair mode, and that the information the nerve is providing me, and if I just have a couple of tools in my toolbox, I can actually control or help manage my own anxiety, stress, and even something as simple as like, someone honking or the doorbell ringing, and, you're just kind of caught off guard. And that first thing where your heart starts being like, oh my gosh, who's going to be at the door? What am I going to do when I get there? And, just like right away noticing the sensation of the body, and then just like going right to the breath and, okay, I'm ready. Let's face whatever's in front of me here. So I guess it sounds so simple, but I don't know. I'm starting to feel how amazing this backup information coming from the science community, from Porges and all the other people that you've worked with who are helping us to live life better.
Right.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like to really make the most of this opportunity that we have.
Right. Yeah. And there's a big theme in the book, and I'm sure you've noticed it, and that it's the theme of trauma.
Yeah.
So, how trauma, damages our capacity to sense these vagal impressions that are vital to our health and well-being. And so I like the way, the author parses out the notion of trauma. And I think that's very important also in a yoga studio. There's different types of trauma. Typically, we would have physical abuse or physical trauma. It can be just a concussion, but then there's, developmental trauma, and there's sexual abuse, which, we hear about all the time and in the culture and so forth. And then there's PTSD. The author talks about PTSD. So I'm a relative expert in PTSD because I have this 100% service-related military PTSD disability from being in the military. So there's that type of, military trauma. So I think it's very important that the listener also have some way to navigate, and this is what the book goes towards somewhat, navigate what happens when I touch that history, when I touch that trauma, when I have a recovered memory where all of a sudden, the heart starts to accelerate, or I actually have a recovered memory. I get an image or a sensation. It's like, whoa, it takes me right back into that place. And this is what polyvagal theory is saying, that when those places get touched, there's only a couple of options. We get very activated. The heart starts to race, and that's called sympathetic arousal. But what the polyvagal system discovered is that since there's two types of vagal nerves, the older one, we'll just say there's a new one which is faster, and then the old one which is slower. And some say, we really look at the polyvagal and Porges's work, millions, maybe 200 or 300 million year old vagus nerve. Well, that's pretty old, through a lot of evolutionary development. And it's that particular phase, that particular part of the vagus nerve that causes a deeper reaction to trauma, in which we actually withdraw. So we can get sympathetically aroused. That's kind of like the top part. But depending on the severity of our own history and our own imprinting and so forth, we can run into this like unconscious automatic where all of a sudden we just kind of get dopey, or we just numb out and we withdraw from the world itself. It's called depersonalization or derealization. And the literature is very fond of calling it dissociation. But so meaning that we just numb out and our blood pressure drops, and some people even pass out. It's beautiful hearing Porges lecture about the early literature that he had to study in the 1950s about the vagus nerve. But so we encounter trauma. We can encounter it with, a yoga class, and we sometimes, the book is also about psychotherapy. We can go into therapy and to work on that issue. But when we actually encounter it at the sensory level, noticing what is our style? Are we in the activated stress response of the sympathetics, or are we in that kind of old, ancient default withdrawal, suppress, numb out mode? And so these are distinctions made within the polyvagal model that are being attributed to the vagus nerve itself, and the new one and then the old one that work together.
Can you help me understand, when you say new and old, is it that it's one nerve that has an element to it that's connected to our ancient biology of our origins, and then the newer one is the way the nerve is now evolving due to our modern stresses and technologies? Like, when we say new and old, I mean, the first thing my mind went was to like I have an old, like two separate nerves, and one's the old, like one that's attuned to like the reptilian sort of reaction, or I always hear reptilian brain. I'm not sure if I really fully understand what that means, but, and then like the lizard brain, like I first came across that when people were saying like, we're all aliens and,
Right.
we're really reptiles. And I was like, what? But I have noticed that, well, can you, based off what I asked, does any of that make sense? How how to explain this old and new. Is it one nerve that has aspects of like this ancient part and a newer part? What do you mean?
Well, I think it's important just to, let me just mention Paul MacLean's work at National Institutes of Health, and he pretty much put what's called the triune brain on the map. So we're kind of predating Porges and Polyvagal, but it's very important because MacLean's work really made a big splash about the evolution of the human brain and the evolution of the human central nervous system. So to understand that, we have to look at the Precambrian period of life. You know, we're talking about 500 million years ago, when the very first creatures, we could say, that had nervous systems that would ultimately become or evolve into or be used by Homo sapiens began to evolve, okay? And the very first dynamic, what we now call the brainstem. So we all have a brainstem, and that's the really old part of our brain. And when you say reptilian or lizard or what the lizard brain, I like the lizard brain. You know, you and I are in South Florida. I mean, there's a lot of lizards around here, you know, big ones and little ones and 6 foot tall lizards. I mean, we got some real interesting critters around here that are living in their brainstem. But the point being that in the evolution, the brainstem is really responsible for really rapid response time. You know, you and I live here, and you know, and I grew up here, so I grew up looking at lizards and watching their responsiveness, how quickly they move, and all of that in response to threat. Because the issue, back to safety, is how you manage threat in the environment. So the brainstem evolved right away because in early evolution, you had to move quickly or you were done. Okay, so gradually over time, and you know, and then we get into the period of Homo sapiens and so forth, in maybe 100 million, however old our species might be. So we get into the midbrain, where groups of us, early us, you could say, would band together because it's better to be together as a group to protect yourselves, you know, in early history, than it was to be alone. So in order to do that, you had to develop a part of your brain where you had affiliative behaviors and you could become more social. So the midbrain part is really, really important. The emotional brain is what that's called. In managing your emotions and being able to settle, if you lived with a group, for a common dynamic that you had to protect your community from the outside world. And you could just imagine, you know, all the dynamics associated with that. And then gradually in evolution, there's the forebrain. So the orbital frontal cortex or whatever, you know, the literature might be calling it today. But so that's the newer brain, in which you had more executive function. You could live together and you could override with your thinking processes and your inner ability to process information. You could override that early responsiveness to kill, to fight, to flee, and you could be able to negotiate. So the triune brain dynamic is very important. So the polyvagal theory hitchhikes on that. Both these branches of the vagus nerve are coming out of the brainstem. So yeah, you could say that they're reptilian in their own way, but not really, because in our evolution, you've got, the super old part of the brainstem, but then you've got newer additions because these parts are not separate. They're all together. So the brainstem has all these functional circuits with midbrain and the forebrain and so forth. So, but we retain that old lizard, dynamic, because the lizard dynamic and the reptilian dynamic is not necessarily always about an immediate response. It's about death feigning. In other words, withdrawal of cardiovascular support, lowering of blood pressure in order to save myself, because if I play dead, the creature that's attacking me, whether it's another human or an animal, might just pick me up and not eat me. It might really, really support my survival. So that's a very important part of our structure, is that capacity to immobilize for health and well-being. But we also have to, that same function, which is super old, and we need that as a protective mechanism. And yes, and it's evolutionarily driven, but we also need that to go to the bathroom. We need to sit and immobilize in order to have a bowel movement. We need to sit or stand and immobilize in order to urinate, and so forth. So it's very important to understand that it's not always about trauma. So, and then the newer part came along with the association for this forebrain connection, where we could talk ourselves down out of it. If I feel my heartbeat, Todd, I'm going to use my thinking process. Wow. I'm going to use my forebrain. Wow. I've got an accelerated heart rate. Yeah. What am I going to do? Yeah. What am I going to do is coming from the forebrain, and I can look around, I can change my behavior, I can get away from the stimulus, whatever that might be. In the day and age we live, I could get away from the stimulus without a lot of violence, hopefully, or perhaps. Mm-hmm. But you see the dynamic associated with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Good answer. Now I understand.
Long answer, but...
Well, you have to. It's interesting. Do you think that the vagus nerve is a newer nerve in our as we were able to develop this new element in our mind that could say, what shall I do? I feel this. Now what's my option? That then a new nerve pathway has formed in our species? Do you think the vagus nerve has always been there from the beginning, or is it something that has slowly evolved its way in now that we have this ability to socialize if we choose, or we can be safe even if we're not in a group? It seems like sometimes we feel safer when we're, if I feel stimulus and I retreat into the studio, or I go home and just close the curtains and sit in my room and get into a quiet space, I guess what I'm wondering is, we have evolved and we are evolving. So where's the problem? Where's the problem? Are we just not taking advantage of what we have? Is that what it is? We're not using ourselves to the capacity that we could or can. And what is the problem?
What is the problem? Well, in terms of
is there a problem?
In terms of this book, ultimately there's no problem. But in terms of this book, and that was on the last podcast, remember? There's no difference between samsara and nirvana.
Oh, God, it's so funny, because I brought up with somebody, I said, hey, I'm getting ready to have this conversation with Dr. Michael Shea about the polyvagal theory. And he said, what, is that an everything bagel? And I said, no, polyvagal, not polybagel. And he thought that the poly, and I said, oh boy, okay, let's back it up here. So, but I mean that, or I say that as a joke, because it is a little complex. But what were you going to say? I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I said it. So there we are. But
there is no problem.
The problem, back to the beginning of the conversation, is trauma. The degree to which we as human beings are imprinted transgenerationally, genetically, from what we're carrying from our lineage, our ancestral lineage, what we're carrying and have been imprinted while we were pregnant in our mom's womb, and how we were imprinted and what we carry from early infant and childhood experiences, and even our day-to-day, adult experiences. So it's important that, one of my favorite, Robert Thurman, one of my favorite Buddhist teachers is Robert Thurman, and he's a professor emeritus at Columbia University. And he said, and this was very helpful to me, we are the trauma species. Homo sapiens is the trauma species. Nobody escapes trauma to one degree or another. But we all have our own unique way of responding and reacting to trauma. So, and therein lies the challenge, because we all have this different type of imprinting that causes it's called in the literature a set point. So everybody has a different set point or a threshold that, when triggered, so to speak, will cause this reactive behavior and so forth.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it interesting, around all that.
Yeah.
So yes, there is
That's
trauma.
cool. Yeah.
It's not unique to humans.
Yeah.
And there's a part of that we really need to accept as human beings. And the acceptance component doesn't mean it's okay. It just means that we have to come to terms with it because it's never changed. War, violence has never changed in the history of the human culture. Yes, there's been periods where there's been less, and there's been periods where there's been more. And we have to really appreciate and get into the yoga of this, we are talking about a fundamental mystery. Yeah. It's a mystery of life. And the older you get, we have to process this trauma in a different way. And this is why this book and this is why yoga is so important, that it brings us into an embodied sense of who we are. It gives us a greater adaptability and a greater ability to change those brain structures that have changed over the millennia. We don't know how long it's been going on, but the book and the literature is saying we can change these neurological patterns. Yeah. And we can change them through yoga, through certain really, evidence-based forms of psychotherapy and so forth.
Can you talk a little bit about what Dr. Schwartz mentions in the book about this psychotherapeutic approach is a more of like top-down approach, and yoga and or meditation is like this from the bottom up approach in relation to somatic awareness, and the interplay between reasoning and thinking the problem out. Like if I experienced a difficult traumatic event, and then I go through a talking therapy to help to relieve my association to that experience, versus a yoga practice or a meditation practice being primarily a somatic approach. Any thoughts or feelings there?
I think, again, the notion of top down and bottom up comes out of a field called affective neuroscience. So, and we're actually just talking about a neurologically based model. So the polyvagal model is a neurologically based model, but there are others. And this book borrows from a couple, and it is borrowing from affective neuroscience. And that has to do with when we're born, how the brain actually develops outside of the uterus, outside of the womb. And so you see in the first year of development a tremendous amount of growth. With the first 12 months neonatally, perinatally is incredibly important, because all the brain is kind of set in place in terms of these pathways between the front, the middle, and the back. And that's called attachment theory. And so the way in which we attach to our caregivers and our parents and so forth is very important, because that's where these set points and these thresholds also can change,
that's
depending on our parenting.
Yeah.
And when we're left alone as an infant and we're not crying, that's when the parasympathetic, that's when the vagus nerve develops its safety function, feeling safe, because I can be internal and I can feel the inside of my body. And I can feel this bottom-up dynamic of the vagus nerve developing and sending information to the brain where there's not an outside threat. I'm not being yelled at or screamed at or whatever. I'm left alone and I'm not crying. And you see this in really healthy attachments. That's how the vagus nerve develops that ability to give bottom-up information about chilling and overriding. See, your body in a yoga class, you can override, all the stuff that's going on in your brain about stress and all that. This is why it's so beautiful. But the top-down model is also saying that at a cognitive level, our thinking can be disrupted from these early attachment experiences, and we're not even thinking correctly, or we're not interpreting the information we're getting from our body. So we can over-intellectualize it, we can over-somatize it, overthink it,
Yep.
And
Yep.
we're still out of balance. And all this is talking about is top down, bottom up. And bottom up has to have a lot of support with somatic practices, especially yoga and meditation.
Yeah. Interesting. Good answer. Thank you. Well, what is so we have afferent neuroscience, and then there's also
affective. It's called
affective.
affective neuroscience.
And
in other words, emotional affecting means the affect. Affect is another word for emotion. So the way we express emotions in the literature is called affect. And so affective neuroscience is the science of how we develop emotional responsiveness in childhood, neonatally, perinatally.
In humans, when is it considered an appropriate time to not have that type of care? That's one thing I'm finding so fascinating, as I'm reading and thinking about my own life and my own trauma and wonderment of what type of care did I get in that, say, 0 to 2 age frame? Like at what level? And so it's been such a fascinating meditation just in reading and just kind of feeling and trying to go back to that phase of, obviously my memory does not go back that far. So I don't remember laying in the crib and looking up or whatever. But I guess maybe where I could contact that memory is through how safe I feel now. Because if I wasn't allowed to feel safe in that early stage, perhaps it does have a huge effect on us later on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So is
That's
there
the point.
is there
one point.
Is there an idea that at about age 5 is when you're ready, you're good to go? Or is it like it's probably both, a continuous thread throughout life? Because it seems like that attachment phase where it's really critical, having someone hold us. What I'm loving hearing her talk about is just like rocking, and just doing really simple, gentle rocking motion. Or when we see someone who's maybe undergoing some sort of therapeutic process, maybe such as psychotherapy, they're struggling and they maybe just will naturally start to rock because it's like an innate thing that if we were lucky enough to be held when we were children, somebody rocked us. And it makes sense that then I could, in my own yoga practice, just do a very simple rocking motion with the body in a position and just try to inspire a sense of safety, a sense of connection. So I guess I'll get back to my initial question. Is there a certain amount of time that's absolutely essential that we receive this to be able to function healthfully in the world? Or, like age 2, age 5, age 10? What is the theory there?
Well, when I sat at the feet of these masters, I mean these neurological masters, and I'm specifically talking about Alan Shore, as well as Stephen Porges. Now, Alan Shore is another big contributor in this interpersonal neurobiology series, and he said something really profound, because Alan Shore is the expert on affective neuroscience. So I studied his work intensively. And he said something interesting to the same question that one of the students asked. And his answer was, it's never too late to get the love you missed. As a human being, love is such a critical component at any stage of life. Because you're right. I don't know what I missed. I interviewed my mom and I interviewed my dad, and I said, what was I like when I was,
Did you guys take care of me or not? Yeah.
Right. But it's like, but I got some interesting information about that as well from both my mom and dad when I asked them. But
TMI, you got more than you wanted? More than you...
Yeah, I got a little too, it was a little too TMI. My mother was so sweet because you have to be careful when you ask your parents about
true.
your pregnancy and what you were like as a baby. You have to phrase it in a certain way, because a lot of parents have regrets about the way what they did. My mother went to her deathbed with a regret, and she would never tell me what the regret was that she had in her life.
Yeah.
When you study, death, in hospice care, boy, if you're getting ready to die, you got to be done with these regrets in life, man.
Yeah.
Get up to date. But at any rate, God bless my mother. My mother smoked a pack she was very fond. I smoked a pack of cigarettes every day when I was pregnant with you, and I drank 2 drinks of scotch every night and 3 on the weekend when I was pregnant with you. And you kids, you think that that's all going to be wrong and something's wrong with you. And my jaw was like down to here. It's like, wow, a pack a day. No wonder I don't like scotch. But the point is, you can investigate with your parents because it's very warm and wonderful to be in that conversation and be curious about your past. Yeah. What if you're adopted? That's another conversation altogether.
Yeah.
And you would want to be able to do that, with your adoptive parents and find out what you can as best you can.
Yeah.
And have support, because all of this, if you find out information that is shocking to you and you go, oh my God, no wonder I'm so messed up, then you've got to have some support. So you want to make sure you have some support as you're investigating your past. But the reality is, do we really need to investigate our past when the answer is getting love, seeking love, getting the experience of love in the present moment, and kind of gradually letting go of the past and accepting that the past happened. We're still here. We're still alive, doing the best we can, and that it's a tapestry, and that this tapestry has woven a whole person, and I am this whole person, and I deserve love, and I can get love, and I can express love. And I think one of the things, especially like in a yoga practice, or even she mentions in a meditation practice, you can have these experiences of awe. You can call them love, but these experiences of awe are really, really important. Experiences of love, experiences of settling, experiences of peacefulness. These are so critical. And it's the last chapter in her book because she really goes through the sequence of managing what you can do in the present moment. So that's kind of another long answer to your question. But
no, it's good.
Yeah.
No, it makes perfect sense.
Never too late. Never too late. And I did because I investigated the past because 20 or 25 years ago, that's what you did in the American model of New Age therapy. You investigated your babyhood, your childhood, and so forth.
Yeah. Well, how has the American model or current global model evolved from that? Is that what this book is presenting? That we aren't necessarily needing to only rehash the amount of packs of cigarettes smoked and scotches drank, and to make the excuse to why I'm so messed up. We're using proper language. We're trying to not curse here.
Right.
Messed up. And
occasionally feel like we're messed up. If you feel like you're constantly 24/7 messed up, get some help.
Yeah. Of course. Yes, please. How have we evolved this understanding now that we have this? It seems like the polyvagal theory is an evolution of what you had mentioned, borrowing from or piggybacking off of that prior theory where we got into the understanding of the reptilian brain and the forming of this kind of understanding of where we are now. Where have we made some strides in our therapeutic models since the 70s, the 80s, and 90s? And is that answer that we're integrating yoga and meditation into these more scientifically designed therapeutic rooms, spaces?
That's a really hard question, because there's so many forms of therapy now. I mean, psychotherapy, psychiatric therapy, and many forms are involved with pharmaceuticals, and now the trend, just in terms of trauma, are psychedelic-assisted therapies with MDMA, ketamine, and psilocybin mushrooms, and LSD. The FDA, as of 2 weeks ago, just approved LSD as an anxiety therapy. Okay, so
amazing. That's a huge.
It's huge.
That's a huge turnaround.
It's a huge turnaround, and then marijuana being used within the context of anxiety and so forth. So there's a lot of good medical research, around that. But we're talking about yoga, and we're talking about a map to deal with this. And I think what she does in her book is a really good job. And if I may say, because you know more about this than I do, but she's trying to merge the traditional yamas and niyamas. And I think she does a really good job, because I think the yamas and the niyamas, and the way she describes the eightfold path, is it's been there forever, Todd.
Yeah,
it is built within the context of your mastery, your work here at the studio with Tamara and the other teachers that you have here. So it's already built in, and I didn't really understand it that well when I got my certification here, but when I read this, I was focused on this. It's like, oh, now I understand niyamas.
I know I had so many light bulb moments too as I'm reading this.
Right. And she does a really good job with it, because she places it within the context of our conversation that we've just been having. And then she's got her 5 stages of, through the therapeutic yogic practice that you can follow. And she's weaving in the yamas and niyamas. And I think that's critical.
Yeah. And why do you feel it's critical? The morality piece? Is that the part that you're feeling is critical? The morality in the sense of, well, I like what you said earlier about once you recognize that you have experienced trauma and you have the question of what to do next, you said one of the answers is find love here now. Start to find some love here now, and then from there, that can expand out. And I know that might be easier said than done, but I actually don't think that's so difficult. I think if we really truly want or need compassion, empathy, and love from other humans, it's here.
Appropriate sources.
Thank you.
Of love,
and hence why morality is very important.
Right.
So I guess that's where I'm curious why you are really having this epiphany about the yamas and niyamas, because I typically look at the yamas and niyamas as a first laying down a moral code. Let's not be violent. Let's speak truthfully with one another. Let's acknowledge. Let's not steal. So I'm not going to take from you, right? I'm not going to steal. From brahmacharya, which is often defined as like sexual, being sexually responsible. But I think that's really important, because it kind of says, look, when children are developing, they're not to engage in any of that type of behavior. So I think that obviously is hugely important. And then not being greedy. So this is like a moral code that we need to adhere to. So why do you feel the moral code is playing such an important role in, or why you're now all of a sudden seeing it a little bit more clear?
Well, what I'm referring to are the, I think she calls it the 8 niyamas.
Oh yeah. Well, there's the 5 yamas and 5 niyamas, and then the niyamas go into saucha, which is like cleanliness, and then we have santosha, which is contentment, and then we have tapas or tapaha, which is austerity and or having a understanding of how heat affects us. And we have swadhyaya, which is study or self-observation or study of sacred texts. And then we have ishwarta pranidhana, having some sense of something beyond just me, like that there's a greater me, it's a bigger me.
Right.
So,
well, the way I'm looking at it, as she says at the beginning of the book, and then in chapter 6 here, initially the yamas and niyamas help us navigate our relationships with others and ourselves. And I think that's what we're just talking about.
Correct.
The moral code, so to speak.
Yeah.
Asana and pranayama help us refine our relationship to body and breath so we may release unnecessary tension. and so forth. We then develop our capacity to refine our mental capacities with pratyahara, which invites us to withdraw our senses from the outer world. And dharana, is that right?
It is concentration.
Which invites us to immerse ourselves in the present moment through focused attention. And then dhyana, or meditation, is the outcome of the efforts of all the previous limbs. Meditation is the experience of an expansion of consciousness beyond the confines of the mind. So here's the point, that I gleaned from this.
Please.
There's another neuroscience that's important that we mentioned. So we've mentioned polyvagal neuroscience, we've mentioned affective neuroscience, but we also have the emerging field of what's called contemplative neuroscience. So yoga and meditation fit within this whole dynamic of contemplative neuroscience in what we're finding out, how we can change our brain. I think in my reading of these, and especially pratyahara. Let me just say. Let me just say.
We both looked at the clock.
I know, we both looked at the clock.
How are we going to do this in 3 minutes?
I think we can do this in 3 minutes because it might be a good way for completion. And that is, I was asked a couple of years ago to do an interview, a filmed interview about cancer. And I looked at the interviewer and I said, I'm not a doctor, I don't have cancer patients in my practice, but ever since then I have. But I looked at the person that wanted to do this and I said, I can tell you one thing about the people that I talk to, is that when they're given the cancer diagnosis, they're terrified. They enter a state of terror. And the reason for that is they do not have knowledge of pratyahara. They do not know how to turn inward. This science of yoga and meditation is so unbelievably critical in terms of contemplative neuroscience. And this, to me, is the key in these 8 niyamas, is that moment when we have to turn inward to discover our inner spiritual reality that lives within us and lives within our heart. And that is the key. When you turn inward, what is meditation? Come on. She gives a couple of definitions here, but meditation is anything that allows us to turn inward, to concentrate appropriately, and to settle and achieve a calm and peaceful state of mind, and to develop an open-hearted sense of self and other. But it begins with the turn inwards. I think that's the critical part in this book. That's what the yoga in this studio, for me, teaches, because you got to turn inwards to feel your body and your vagus nerve.
Oh, good job.
Did we do it?
I think we did it.
Thank you, Todd. Wow.
I know, that went by so fast. We both set our goal for each other that we're going to do this within 50 minutes.
Right.
And just try to talk in a way that we get to our point and be succinct, but also be able to dig in there a little bit.
Right.
And but we're going to be doing it again. This is episode number 7 with you. We're going to keep going here.
Sure.
Yeah.
Book comes out at the end of the year. We'll do another one.
That sounds amazing. I like the fact that you just called me up and said, Todd, you got to read this book and let's do a talk on it. And you're keeping me abreast on what's happening currently in this field. And I also just really, really appreciate the opportunity as a therapist, as a massage therapist. And I'm not I'm doing air quotes, licensed or a yoga therapist, because that requires special certification for me to use that. But I can't help but just feel like every yoga practice, every yoga setting is the most amazing therapeutic way to deal with everything here and now that we're facing. It just feels so incredible. I'm so thankful that got into this whole yoga world back when. I don't know how I would survive without it, to be honest. I know that sounds like a religious experience, like, oh, if I didn't find this special, but it is that special. It has had that type of effect on me. And I love how, like, a book like this and you prompting me to do some further study and inquiry, just really, it just keeps getting better. And I just feel so thankful for all this. So,
just to say the turn inward, and she points it out in the book. I mean, I feel it's critical, because I'm a meditation teacher. Yes. But the turn inward, she points out, is not an easy path for some people with their history of trauma.
Yeah.
So this is why her exercises and the pieces that she takes the reader through, if you're a yoga teacher or a yoga practitioner, can be very helpful to navigate the rough spots in the turn inward, where the vagus nerve is giving you information that you need to handle in your life, so to speak.
Well said. All right. Adios.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you, Michael.